You're listening to the weekly Parsha podcast with Ari Goldwag, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramat Shemesh Israel, 5778, 2017. This week's Parsha is Parsha's Toldos. And in our Parsha this week, we have the beginnings of the story of the Torah's description of the events that occurred in the life of Yaakov, Avinu, of Jacob, and his brother Esav, Esau. And the Torah tells us a few different things, a number of different stories, but the gist or the main topic that we have is how Esav is born first. He was the firstborn. He was very physical. He was very, even when he was born, he was very hairy. His name was Esav, which means milashon asui. He was made. He was already to a certain extent complete when he was born. So he was physically very much complete. Yaakov Avinu was the ishtam. He was the whole or simple person. Yosef Oyeholim, he sat in the tents, and it's very interesting. The description in our parsha is about how Yaakov Avinu first buys the bechorah, the firstborn rights, the spiritual rights, to be the one who brings the korbanos, the sacrifices, those things that anyway Esav was not so interested in. He was more magushim, he was more physical. So Yaakov purchases that for a bowl of adashim, a bowl of lentils. And as the parsha continues, so we find that Yaakov Avinu is forced almost by his mother, by Rivka, who knew that Yaakov was supposed to be greater, who was the greater one, because she had that nevuah, she had that divine inspiration when she was pregnant with them. So she encouraged and almost forced the hand of Yaakov to steal the blessings, the firstborn blessings of Esav, and then he was forced as a result. Esav hated him, he was angry at him, he was forced to run off, etc., which is what we find that will be this discussion of next week's Parsha. But in looking at this, in evaluating the story, trying to understand what's going on, so it strikes me as very difficult and needs explanation. Why is it, indeed, why did Hashem set it up in such a way that Esav would be born first, that he would be the one who has the firstborn rights, if he was not going to be somebody who indeed would be that it would be appropriate for him to have them, that he would be someone who would be mityaches, who would have a relationship with those firstborn rights, with the kedusha, with the holiness, with the spirituality. That's not who Esav was. Why was Esav indeed born first, forcing the hand of Yaakov to have to come and steal or trick, as Esav says, Yaakov forced his hand twice. So, but why did Hashem set it up in such a way that Yaakov would have to steal the brachas, that he would have to catch Esav when he was very hungry, force him to give him the firstborn rights in a certain sense, as a result of him buying them for a bowl of soup, for a bowl of lentils? Why was it set up this way? Why didn't Hashem just make it really simple? Let Yaakov Avinu be born first. Yaakov is the one who is more spiritual. Yaakov is the one who naturally is connected to spirituality. Let him be born first. Let Esav be born second. And we'll skip all of these difficulties, all of these challenges, all of the mishaps that occur as a result of this exchange. Why was it exchanged? And furthermore, to make the question even in a little bit more difficult, a little bit more challenging, Yaakov, is he doing the right thing? Yaakov is tricking him, right? That's what Esav says. He tricked me twice. Yaakov has to trick him with the bowl of soup, with the bowl of lentils. Yaakov has to run in and steal the brachas, steal the blessings. Seems like he's doing something wrong. Yaakov, ishtam. Yaakov is the epitome of the concept of emes, of truth. Why is it, or what's the pshat? How could Yaakov take something which isn't his? Doesn't seem to be his. Is it his? Is it not his? Is he taking something that really belongs to him? Now, what's very interesting is this concept is discussed. There's a story from Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman has a whole story which I can't, there's not enough time for me to get into in great depth or in great detail, but this story is basically about a king who has a son, who has a prince. His wife, the queen, gives birth to a child, and at the same time, they have a slave. There's a slave who lives in the area, and she also has a child at the very same time. The babies are switched at birth. And so the slave, the son of the slave, ends up becoming the prince. He's raised as a prince. And the true prince is raised as the son of a slave. But all along and throughout the story, the son of the king, the true prince, is drawn towards royalty, is drawn towards greatness. And the son of the slave is drawn towards things that are more crass. He learns the ways of royalty, but it's never natural for him. And the story progresses, and by the end of the story, they end up being returned to their rightful place. The son of the prince, the true prince, the son of the king and the queen, ends up becoming the king, and the slave boy ends up becoming the slave to the king. But the story represents this switching that we see in our Parsha, and soon we'll see that it's not just in our Parsha, but truly it's a theme that you find throughout the entire Torah, throughout the entire history of the Jewish people. But in the story, so you see it very clearly that there is a switching that has happened, and it represents the switching of the physical and the spiritual, right? We look at each other, we look at the physical worlds, we look at ourselves, and we see the physical. That's what we see. The spiritual aspects of ourselves, the spiritual aspect of the world, is much more difficult to see. So the spiritual, which is the true prince, so to speak, the true reality, so that's been switched. Adam HaRishon, Kodem HaChet, Adam before his sin, if you would have looked at him, what would you have seen? You would have seen, as the deeper sources explain, his skin, his or, the word for skin in Hebrew is or with an ayin. His skin was or with an aleph. Originally, it was with an aleph, which means light. So you would look at him and you would only see spiritual light. You would have to squint your eyes to make out the fact that he has a physical body. But it was reversed of the way it is now. Today, our physical aspect, the physical aspect of ourselves, is that which is dominant, is that which we see, is that which seems to be the king, seems to be the prince. But things are reversed. The truth is that the spiritual aspect is what's supposed to be the prince, what's supposed to be dominant, what's supposed to be in charge. But things have been reversed. Things have been switched as a result of the sin of Adam HaRishon. And this, as Rabbi Nachman explains, Rabbi Nassan explains, his student, this is the concept of why it says about Adam HaRishon that after he sinned, he was thrown out of the Gan, he was sent away from the Garden of Eden, and there was a cherem hamishapeches, which means, ordinarily is translated as a sword which is spinning, a spinning sword. But actually, it actually means, mitapech means the switch. It's switched. There was a sword that switched. Something was switched. Things were switched up, switched around. That which was originally primary became secondary. That which was originally secondary became primary. So we got, as a result of Adam HaRishon's sin, we came into the predicament, the situation that we're in now, which is where the physical aspect is dominant, comes into this world dominant, and the spiritual aspect seems to be secondary. Now, that is what's going on here in the story of Yaakov Avinu, with Yaakov and Esav. Esav is the physical aspect. Esav is the one who comes out fully complete. He comes out looking like an adult, even though he's a baby. So he's that complete aspect, the physical aspect. And Yaakov Avinu is the spiritual aspect. He's the weaker aspect. He's the meeker. It seems on the surface to be the meeker aspect. And so the result of this idea is that Yaakov is not stealing, so to speak, the brachas of Esav. He's not stealing that which belongs to Esav. He is taking back that which is rightfully his. because he is the prince who has lost his status. As a result of Adam HaRishon's sins, everything is upside down. Everything is turned over. Yaakov Avinu is born second, really should have been born first. He really should have. But because of the world, the predicament that we find ourselves in now, everything is reversed. So the megama, the aspiration, or the matara, the goal, is to bring things back to their original state, which is that the spiritual is ascendant. The Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, is the one who's on top. But it's something that has to be done in a sly way. It has to be done in an unusual way to reverse the results of the sin of Adam HaRishon, to get us back to that original state. And if you think about it, this theme, this concept runs throughout the Torah. I mean, you look at Yosef HaTzadik and his brothers. This is talked about, again, in the commentaries on the story, which reference the different statements of Rabbi Nachman and the student Rabbi Nassan. But you look at Yosef and his brothers, really, Lavan, who's the father of Rachel and Leah, of Rachel and Leah. So Lavan switched his two daughters. Rachel was supposed to be the main wife of Yaakov Avinu. She was the one who was supposed to have Yosef first. If Yosef would have been first, so Yosef would not have been, his brothers wouldn't have been jealous of him. He wouldn't have been the object of their jealousy, because he would have been the natural leader, being the firstborn. But because of the switching around of things, Yosef is born as a younger child, as a younger brother. And so he earns the scorn and the jealousy of his brothers. And that results in him being sold and sent down to Egypt. But it really should have been that he should have led them, and he should have been the firstborn. Things were reversed, things were changed. Or even the fact that you find that an Avram Avinu is born to a Terach, who's an idol worshiper, he sells idols. That's this idea of things being reversed. Or you look at Rivka, she is born to Besuel, who is a Rasha. Her brother was Lavan. Rachel and Leah, they were born to Lavan, who was this Rasha. He was an evil person. And yet, they were to be the forebears, the matriarchs of the Jewish people. So you see this theme consistently. And not only that, but you see it throughout history. You see it in the very essence of the Jewish people and our interaction with the nations of the world. You see it even down till today. But you look at the Jewish people, you would, it's very strange. Why is it? Why did Hashem set up history so that it would look like, when the Jewish people return to Israel, that we have stolen the land, which is our land? It looks like we stole this land from the Arab populations who lived here, which we can discuss the truth of that statement. Is it a myth? Is it not true? You read what Mark Twain wrote about in the 1800s about what was going on here in Palestine, in the land of Israel. What's called Palestine, right? The land of Israel in the 1800s, there was nobody here. It was empty. There was no agriculture. There was nothing, right? There was very few people here. There were Jews here in Jerusalem. There were also people of other types of people who were here as well, but it was very limited. There was almost nobody here. And so, but why did Hashem set up the history so that it would look like, or there could be a claim that the Jewish people have stolen the land away from the indigenous people? Why did Hashem set it up this way? And even when you go back to when the Jewish people came in after Mitzrayim, after their sojourn in Egypt and in the wilderness, there were Canaanite nations that they had to overcome, had to conquer. So why did Hashem set it up in such a way? Why couldn't it just have been empty? Let Klal Yisrael come in. Let the Jewish people come in. Why is it that the world is set up in such a way that the Jewish people, who are really supposed to be the leaders of the world, a light unto the nations, why is it that we have gone into exile, that we haven't been able to establish until very recently a country of our own? If we are supposed to be the leaders of the world, as is our mission, that's the whole essence of our purpose in life, so why is it set up the opposite? And the answer is this very same concept, which is what Rabbi Nachman refers to as the Heichal HaTmuros, the chamber of exchanges. And the idea is that the king, the true prince, loses his crown. It's switched to somebody else. The nations of the world seem to be in charge. The nation of Edom, which today manifests, Esav today manifests as Western culture, the United States, Europe, that aspect they have the crown right now. But the Jewish people are supposed to have the crown, right? The Jewish people are supposed to lead the world spiritually. But currently, that's not the state of affairs. It seems to be the opposite. There's only, at best, 16 million Jews or something like that. Of them, maybe a few million of them are actually connected to the traditions of our forefathers. There are 1.6 billion Arabs, Muslims. There are 1.4 billion Christians, right? So we look at the world, it doesn't seem like the Jewish people it seems like we have lost our crown. We have lost our kingship. We have lost our status of who we're supposed to be. And instead, Esav, he's the one who has it. He's the one who has that crown. But this is the setup. This is the way it's meant to be. It's meant to be reversed. It's meant to have this inverse way of reality being. And part of what we're going for, part of what all of history is about, is bringing back the king, bringing back the true prince to become back to his rightful place, to become the prince that he truly is. But in the meantime, we watch and we wonder and we say everything seems to be reversed. Everything seems to be the opposite. Everything, Yishmael. It's the same thing in the story of Yishmael and Yitzchak. Yishmael is born first as well. And he seems to be the one who's going to be the heir of Abraham, of Abraham. And to this day, it seems like who has spiritual ascendancy? It seems to be Yishmael. But the true prince, which is the Jewish people, which is Yitzchak Avinu, Isaac. So Sarah Imenu, who her name is princess. Sarai means my princess. Sarah means the princess. So she is the true matriarch. She is the true princess. Yes, Hagar, who gave birth to Yishmael, she was the maidservant, and she had been a princess in Egypt, but she was not the true princess. She was not Sarah. And so there's that chamber of exchanges again, where it seems to be that Yishmael is the one who's going to be the heir of Avram, and he's fighting for that. Until this day, they're fighting for that. They're fighting for the fight over Yerushalayim, the fight over Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. Is this fight? Who is the true prince? Who is the true chosen one of God? Who is the actual true prince? And there's been an exchange, and we're waiting for the exchange to be returned. And we know, and we find this theme throughout the Torah, that the Jewish people, what are we going for? We're going for the times of Mashiach, of the Messiah. And the idea of the Mashiach, of the Messiah, is where the crown is returned to its proper place. And the Jewish people become the people who they're supposed to be. We become the leaders of the world. Spiritually, we become recognized. And in the story of Rabbi Nachman, so ultimately the slave's son admits, and he allows himself to become the slave of the true prince. So there's an admission, and that's paralleled in the Torah itself. We find that when Yitzchak and Yishmael bury Avraham, when Avraham dies, Yishmael, we also find, we mention the fact that he dies, which signifies the fact that at the end of Yishmael's life, he repented. And in fact, when you look at the order, when it comes to the burial of Avraham, it places Yitzchak before Yishmael. Whereas by Esav, interestingly, by Esav and Yaakov, when they bury Yitzchak, Esav's name comes first. And the reason is, as Chazal, our sages explain, because Yishmael was Chayzer B'tshuva. Yishmael, who's the aspect of the Muslim nation, so at the end, so he admits to the truth that that Yitzchak is the main progeny, is the main spiritual heir of Avram Avinu, of Abraham. And so the result is that Yishmael turns around at the end. There's an admission by the slave that he is indeed a slave, and the true prince gains back his crown, becomes the true king. And so that's what we're waiting for. And I want to say that the lesson for us, if we think about it, we think about it on a personal level, and this is true on a global level, and it's interesting, but how does it apply to me? The lesson for us is that in our lives also, the main drive that we have is a physical drive, because there's the switching. The spiritual drives that we have, the spiritual aspirations that we have, often can take a back burner, often can take the back seat. And that's because of this switch. That's because of the Heichal HaTmuros, the chamber of switches, of things being exchanged. So in our lives, naturally, it seems that the physical things, the physical desires, they take the front seat. They're the things that we feel and we sense and we're drawn towards. But the truth is, and this is what happens in the story of Rabbi Nachman, and I keep pointing over here because here I have Rabbi Nachman's stories. In the story of Rabbi Nachman, so at a certain point, the true son of the prince and the slave son, they feel inside of themselves that they have to admit the truth. They have to go after who they really are. The slave son realizes that he needs to admit that the king's son is the true king. And the king's son, the prince, realizes that he can't live a lie anymore. He can't continue to live as a slave son. He needs to be who he really is. And so each one of us inside of ourselves has the voice of the true prince and has the voice of the slave son. We have the physical voice, the voice of our desires, of our physical desires. And each one of them, both of them know the truth. And one of the things that I've shared with you in the past, which I heard from Rosh Hashiva, is that you can always tell which is a good thing and which is not such a good thing. Because when it comes to the physical desires, often, so when we're on the way to doing those physical desires, or we're in the middle of doing them, so we feel nice. But afterwards, often the feeling is, I can't believe that I did that, especially in regards to an Aveira, but even in regards to regular things like, let's say, eating a lot or whatever it is. When a person gives into his physical desires, so it feels good before and during, but it feels bad afterwards. As opposed to a spiritual thing, something that's spiritual, before and during, it doesn't necessarily feel good. It's challenging, it's difficult. But afterwards, a person always feels, or generally feels, a deep satisfaction. I know I did the right thing. I know I went against my Yitzhak, I went against my natural inclination. I did what I knew was right. That's always a deeper satisfaction. So what you see in that, by the way, is you see that even the physical aspect of ourselves that pushes us to do the things that may be wrong or that are more physical, afterwards we know, even within that part of ourselves, we know that that's not our true desire. The true desire is the spiritual aspects of ourselves. And so we have an opportunity always to follow in the ways of Yaakov Avinu, of grabbing back, so to speak, the crown which is rightfully ours, which is the spiritual aspect of ourselves. And that's not an easy thing to do, and it requires tachbulos, it requires tricks. And we have to do things that trick ourselves, so to speak. We have to do things that seem underhanded almost, in order to get back what's rightfully ours, the spiritual aspect of ourselves. And so this is the challenge, and I want to bless you, and I want to ask you to bless me. Hashem should help us to be able to tap into the voice of the Prince, which is inside of us, the voice of spirituality. Hashem should help us to be able to recognize the truth, because that's the beginning of it. Is Hashem should help us to recognize the truth. Who's the real prince? The spiritual aspect of ourselves. And who's the real slave son? Seems to have ascendancy. But Hashem should help us to recognize who is truly supposed to be ascendant, the spiritual aspect of ourselves, and who is supposed to truly be a slave, who's supposed to be subservient, and that's the physical aspect of ourselves. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.